A Look into Deafness by me, Sophia Meyer. Before we dive in, let's look at the actual definition of deafness. According to dictionary.com, to be deaf means to be partially or wholly lacking hearing, deprived of the sense of hearing, or to be unable to hear. Now you may be wondering, why are some people deaf? Well, there are several causes. First, mechanical malfunctions may lead to hearing loss. So this can include damage to tiny bones inside the eardrum's failure to vibrate, or even severe fluid buildup. Deafness can also be caused by fever or diseases including meningitis, mumps, or rubella. Also, while this is not a common cause, any trauma to the head may result in deafness, such as a fractured skull, which may result in a perforation of the eardrum. Lastly, sometimes deafness is simply hereditary, meaning it is passed down from the parents' genes to the child at conception. Now that we know how deafness is caused, let's take a closer look at how it is treated. While there is no cure for hearing loss, there are ways to amplify sound. The most common treatment today of deafness is insertion of a cochlear implant, which is a device that is surgically implanted in the cochlea and delivers an electrical stimuli to the auditory nerve and helps to amplify sound. Secondly, hearing aids, which are also an electronic amplifier, help to increase sound volume. But this is simply placed behind the ear and not implanted like the cochlear implant. An FM system, which is an amplifier that is connected not only to the deaf person but also to the person speaking, can also be used. Finally, most deaf people go through many years of speech therapy in an effort to gain control over their speech and hearing. Alright, now let's dig a little deeper into the vocabulary of deafness. You may have heard of the terms deaf and hard of hearing. And what's the difference, you ask? The word deaf refers to individuals with mild to profound hearing loss. Generally, those who are deaf are able to hear very little or nothing at all. Hard of hearing, on the other hand, refers to those who have hearing loss but also have the ability to hear noises at certain decibels and volumes. People who are hard of hearing may be able to use the phone, listen to music, or carry a normal conversation with a hearing person. But as always, it will depend on each individual and their specific hearing loss. While there are differences between these two groups, there are also plenty of similarities. For instance, both deaf and hard of hearing individuals may use speech or sign to communicate, lip reading to understand spoken word, interpreters in school and other settings, and technologies such as hearing aids, cochlear implants, and FM devices. Lastly, both deaf and hard of hearing individuals often have speech impairments. Now let's take an even closer look into the word deaf. When used with a capital D or lowercase d, the word deaf takes on a whole new meaning. Now, when we're just talking about the medical diagnosis of deafness, it is spelled with a lowercase d. But when a person is labeled as deaf with a big D or little d, now we're talking about how they view themselves as a deaf individual. If someone claims to be big D, this means that an individual is proud of their deafness. They use American Sign Language as their first language and associate with other deaf people through clubs or organizations. However, if someone is labeled as little d, this means that the individual seeks to identify themselves as hearing despite their hearing loss. They do this by using speech, not sign, to communicate, and often associate with hearing people only. Another split in the deaf world is the ongoing debate of deaf education. There are two main approaches. The first one is the oral method. In oral schools, deaf students are taught to talk and listen through speech therapy and listening devices. There are several pros to oralism. First, students can better communicate with the hearing world, and because 90% of deaf children are born into hearing families, many parents enroll their child into oral schools because they simply want to be able to communicate normally with their kids. Being able to talk can also be a huge help when getting a job, playing sports, and other day-to-day activities that require speech.
Created using Powtoon.